that little church on Liberty Hill. Come praise the Lord, let your cup be filled. Raise your voices and we'll sing. Let God's freedom ring from that little church on Liberty Hill.
Go ahead and open up to John chapter 12. John chapter 12. And if you're an overachiever, go ahead and open up to Matthew 26 and Mark 14. However, we're pretty much going to camp out in John chapter 12. So, in the story of Christ, as we've been journeying through the Gospels, we are now in the story literally days away from the crucifixion. This where we are about to read here is the day before the Triumphal Entry. Holy Week is about to begin. Christ is about to head down that road towards that passion, that crucifixion, the resurrection. And interestingly, we're only about 2/3 of the way through the Gospels. So much of that last week of the life of Christ is really zoomed in on and is just packed full of events, of teachings that the gospel authors record. And for those who may be interested in counting such things, this marks the 100th message in this series. So, yeah. And it looks like we're only about maybe 2/3, 3/4 the way through. So, still quite a bit to go. So we're going to jump in here on John chapter 12. And just to let you know, in the weeks to come, there's going to be some that we're not skipping. It's just we've already covered it. So early on, like as we've come to Easter, there are passages that we've addressed, whole passages. And so you can actually go on the website and find those, if you want to go ahead and fill in that information right now, so it's all fresh while we're going over this. But there's passages there that we've already gone over, so we're going to skip over those in the weeks to come. But for now, John chapter 12. We're just going to do the first 11 verses. Let me go ahead and read this, and then we'll just dive into it. Then, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus was who had been dead, whom he had raised from the dead. There they made him a supper, and Martha served, but Lazarus was one of those who sat at the table with him. Then Mary took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard, anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, who would betray him, said, "Why was this fragrant oil not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" This he said, not because he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the money box, and he used to take what was put in it. But Jesus said, "Let her alone. She has kept this for the day of my burial. For the poor you have with you always, but me you do not have always." Now a great many of the Jews knew that he was there, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might also see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. But the chief priests, But the chief priests plotted to put Lazarus to death also, because on account of him many of the Jews went away and believed in Jesus. Excuse me. Talk amongst yourselves. Okay. So, here we are 6 days before the Passover. Right, and the Passover is the day that Jesus is crucified. So we're a week away. Less than a week away. And here he is in Bethany. Bethany is a popular stop for Jesus. It's where he often spends his time. We've said before that he probably spent many a night on Lazarus and Mary and Martha's couch. That just kind of seemed to be his stopping place when he was in the area. He stayed in their house. So there he is again. Last we left him, he was in Jericho, which is up the road a bit. So he would have traveled from Jericho. Now he is in Bethany, which is at the doorstep of Jerusalem. And so he is about to enter in. And while he is having dinner there, Mary comes and has this expensive perfume that she pours on him. The other Gospels tell us that she poured it on his head. John mentions on his feet, and so you have all over that he has been anointed with this. Just some information about this. Spikenard, it comes from a plant that is found in the Himalayas. So not only is it an in-demand fragrant perfume, it comes from nearly 3,000 miles away from Jerusalem. So that she would have a jar of this, it is something that would be very, very costly, very valuable. It's almost a year's wages. As is said in verse 5, he says, you could have sold this for 300 denarii. A denarius is 1 day's wage. That's almost a year's worth of work. So just take what you make in a year, 1 bottle of perfume totaling that much. That's the value of what she was giving. The fact that she poured it on his head, but also on his feet and wiped his feet with her hair. This is a sign of immense humility and devotion. And it was something that the fragrance lingers. I hadn't thought about this before until I was looking over this passage and reading some commentaries and things that this fragrance would have stuck with them. Now, some of y'all probably know I have no sense of smell. So I'm not aware of how perfumes function that way, but I understand that it's something that kind of sticks with you. Right? That the perfume is something that you get it on you and it's there until you're able to wash it off. Okay, well, this would have been a particularly fragrant scent. It's an oil, so it's something that's poured in his hair. It would have gotten his clothes. She washed his feet, so it's in his hair, it's in his skin. It would have stuck with him. And 2,000 years ago, they didn't have the benefit of all the wonderful technological breakthroughs we have in soaps with, like odor-destroying enzymes and all that kind of stuff that we have. So even were he to bathe, chances are it would still be hanging around him. So you stop and think for a minute that over the next week, as Jesus triumphantly enters Jerusalem, as he stands in the temple and teaches, as he is engaging with the Pharisees, even possibly as he is being on trial, beaten, and crucified, he has this scent of being anointed that he is carrying with him. And this was not just any scent. This perfume would have signified the very best. That this would have been the thing, that the important people, that this would signify status in society. So stop and think. I don't usually pay attention when people consider societal statuses. Someone who dresses in a particular designer suit, right? Armani, is that still the going thing, right? Drives the right kind of car. I think BMW, but that may be dated. I don't know what all the, rich, powerful, popular people are driving nowadays. But it's the kind of thing that whenever someone sees that, they go, oh, that is somebody. Whoever's driving that car, that's someone special. Look at the way he's dressed. Oh, that must be someone special. This would have been, look at the scent he's wearing. He's someone special. He's someone important. That's a very expensive, costly thing for him to be wearing that. Oh, he must be royalty. Of course, we know he is. And so you would have had this lingering reminder as he goes through the following days. Verse 4. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, who would betray him, said, "Why is this fragrant oil not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" As we said, this is a very, very expensive thing. I mean, stop and think. If you had an additional year's wages, think of your yearly income. If you had a whole other just years, what could you do with that? Think of the people you could help. Right? I mean, so it makes sense. You think, well, yeah, I mean, that's a lot of money. We could have done something with that. And so on one level, it does kind of seem a little, that makes sense. I mean, this could have been put to really good use. However, there's a couple of points that I think the attitude and the mindset that's being revealed by this shows that we also need to be careful of. First off, the other Gospels record that it's not just Judas that speaks up, that the other disciples as well join in the complaint. Now we know why Judas does it, John tells us, but why would the other disciples, right? I mean, because they don't have his motivation. There's a sense in which we can become worrisome busybodies over what other people are doing. That we look at what other people are doing for God and we go, hey, why are you doing that? You could have done this or you should have done that. Now, hold on a second. Why are we so worried about others? There's a sense of self-righteousness where we worry about other people's acts of devotion. I believe Jesus tells a story about logs and specks. Quit worrying about the log in someone else's eye, or quit worrying about the speck in someone else's eye. Take care of the log in your own eye. Or one of my favorite stories is they're walking along after the resurrection. Jesus is talking to Peter and is telling him how he is going to be martyred for the faith. And it says that Peter sees the disciple whom Jesus loved, John, walking a little ways behind and says, well, what about him? And I'll paraphrase here, but Jesus basically says, mind your own business. He says, what does it matter to you if he lives until I return? Don't worry about the other person. Worry about yourself. And sometimes when we get so caught up in what other people are doing, rather than us focusing on our devotion to God, we're busybodies worrying about how other people, are they worshiping right? Are they doing that right? Now, there's a sense that we're supposed to hold each other accountable. Absolutely. But we have to be careful that it's not a self-righteous worrying over other people's behavior. Also, there's a sense in which charity can become a mindset that's devoid of worship of God. It's very popular nowadays, the term that gets thrown around is social justice, and depending on how you mean that, often it's just meant as caring for those that are in need, that there are injustices in society and we should seek to fix those. But the question becomes, are you just pursuing good deeds for their own end? I mean, 'cause the Bible is full of examples of how we are supposed to care for the poor, care for the needy, care for the orphan, care for the widow. Help those in need, fight injustice, absolutely. Oppose the oppressor, absolutely. But do we, as we can with any good thing, elevate it to a position where it matters more to us than God himself does? That perhaps could be the mindset of what the disciples were entering into when they were becoming indignant. Hey, we could have used that for the poor. Now, hold on a second. Are you just wanting to help the poor just because you've elevated helping others to a legalistic point where that's what you're after rather than worshiping God? It sounds pious. It sounds good, but we as followers of Christ are people who help others out of the gratitude for the help and the love and the grace that we ourselves have already received from him. We say, thank you, Lord, that you would so graciously give to me. Let me then turn and extend that graciousness as an act of worship to him as I care for others the way you cared for me. Verse 6. However, Judas had another motive. This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief, and he had the money box, and he used to take what was put in it. So they had some kind of communal money, and Judas was the guy holding on to it. Maybe he was good with numbers, and at this point, they didn't know he was a thief. Obviously, this is John inserting something he found out later into the text. But we see his real motives. But don't we do this sometimes? Not steal money from the, offering plate. I hope. While it's going around, it might be okay to make change, but don't take out what you didn't put in. We'll just leave it at that. But don't we sometimes give moral-sounding excuses for what's really selfish deeds? Don't we kind of put that whitewash religious look on things just to make an excuse for what we're wanting to do? Sometimes whether we're trying to convince others or maybe even we're trying to convince ourselves that we have righteous motives when in reality what's in our heart is anything other than. But as we walk with Christ through the Holy Spirit, following and obeying, the Scripture says we are being conformed more and more into the image of Christ. We're not there yet. When you look in the mirror, who do you see? You still see you. One of these days, hopefully, probably not till we reach glory. Verse 7. But Jesus said, "Let her alone. She has kept this for the day of my burial. For the poor you have with you always, but me you do not have always." It's another reminder of the events to come in the following days. It wasn't just a chapter ago that Jesus set them down and said, "We're going to Jerusalem. I will be betrayed. I will be arrested. I will be crucified, and I will rise again." And they didn't get it. So he's constantly giving them this reminder. So he's telling them, this is for my burial. This is a common practice at that time in that culture that you would anoint dead bodies with a fragrant oil, with some kind of fragrant perfume and spices. And so what she is doing, she's meaning as just a blessing upon him, a humble act of devotion to him. But he's saying, no, that this is for my burial. My death is coming, and that's what this is for. The time is short. In this fallen and broken world, we will always have the needy. He's saying, guys, you're worried about the poor. Poor ain't going anywhere. In this fallen and broken world, there's always going to be those in need, and you will always be able to find ways to help them. He said, but right now, I'm not going to be here long. And so you need to focus on what is going on in front of you and worry about that. So again, reminding them of his whole purpose of going to Jerusalem to be turned over to the leaders so that he might be crucified, that he might pay the price for our sin. Pointing it out to them again. However, the wickedness of Judas is not the only wicked people in town that day. We see in verse 9 that a great many of the Jews knew that Jesus was there, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might also see Lazarus, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. But the chief priests plotted to put Lazarus to death also, because on account of him, many of the Jews went away and believed in Jesus. So people were coming to see Jesus, but not just coming to see Jesus. I mean, if there was someone who just lived down the street that you knew Jesus had raised from the dead, wouldn't you want to go see him? Oh, look at him. I was at the funeral. They put him in the ground and put the rock in the way. 4 days later, I mean, he wasn't smelling too good, but he came back out. There he is. He's alive. I mean, that's something people would want to behold, to see the miracle that had been worked by Christ. I mean, you can almost kind of understand the religious leaders' opposition to Jesus. He's teaching contrary to them from their point of view. In their twisted view of God, they see him as being blasphemous, as teaching false things. Of course, we also know that it has more to do with their pride and their wanting to hold on to their position. But from a certain sense, you can almost understand their opposition to Jesus. But Lazarus? What kind of dark, wicked soul does it take to want to go kill someone because he is evidence of Jesus? Lazarus being alive is the evidence of Jesus' power and identity. And since they don't want to admit that, let's just go get rid of Lazarus. Then we don't have to face it. Then other people can't be convinced of it. It's a glaring example of what Paul describes in Romans 1 when he says that what has been known about God has been made clear from creation, but there are people who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Rather than seeing and accepting what is obvious and in front of them, they don't want to accept the conclusion, so let's get rid of the evidence. Let's just push aside, ignore, suppress, get rid of the things that point to what we don't want to believe. It's inconvenient, so we'll ignore it or we will get rid of it. They have no desire to follow God, and so they suppress the truth. It's no different than what people do today, though, is it? Whenever something is inconvenient, you don't want to have to accept where it is leading to. Let's just ignore it. Let's just pretend I didn't hear that. Let's just say that wasn't there. Let's only go to people and places that are going to tell me what I want to hear. But people ignore, suppress, and try to get rid of anything that would show them and convince them of the obvious truth of Christianity. We know that God exists. It's obvious. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why does anything at all exist? We know from both science and philosophy that the universe must have a beginning. And anything that begins to exist has a cause. And the universe is made up of space, time, and matter. So whatever that cause is has to be immaterial, spaceless, and timeless, and incredibly powerful. Not part of nature, you might say supernatural. We know that there is immense design found in nature, that we look at the way the world functions, we look at how things operate, and there is a specific mechanism and goal-directed purpose to the way nature functions. Straight down to in every single one of your cells in your DNA, there is basically what accounts to a biological computer code telling your cells what to do. Hey, where do you get a computer program? Computer programmer. You got a computer program in your cells. Where'd that come from? We know that there is morality, that there are things that are for sure wrong, that universally mankind would point at and say, no, that is not allowed. And even if everyone on earth disagreed, that would still be wrong to do. Well, guess what? If there's a moral law, there has to be a moral law giver. We know God exists. It's written in nature. It's written on our hearts. And we know that the Bible's true. We know that it was written by eyewitnesses, particularly the New Testament. Every book of the New Testament was written either by an eyewitness or a disciple of an eyewitness who got the facts from those who were there and saw what happened. That it was written within living memory so that if it was wrong, people could have stood up and said, no, that's wrong. I was there. That's not what happened. We know that we have so many copies of the New Testament that we can actually compare and know where people made errors. You ever hear someone say, well, the Bible's full of errors. You know how you know that? Because we know where they are. We can identify them because we have so many copies that we can look and go, okay, yeah, that one here, these other, 5,000 don't say that, so this one's wrong. We can compare and know what the Bible says. It has been preserved in that manner. We also have all of the historical confirmation. Archaeology and other historical documentation time and time and time again confirm what the Bible writers wrote. That they had intimate, detailed knowledge of the time, the people, the place, the culture in which they were writing, that if they were somewhere else, some other time, they could not have made that up and been accurate. We know that Jesus rose from the dead. Even non-Christian, atheist, Jewish, secular historians will affirm as fact, undeniable historical fact, that Jesus of Nazareth lived in first century Israel, that he was crucified under Pontius Pilate, that he was laid in a tomb. That tomb was later empty, and his disciples claimed to have witnessed him risen from the dead. Now they want to stop and go, but that doesn't mean he really rose from the dead. Actually, it does. because there is no other explanation for those facts. We know that there were appearances. We know that there were changed lives. That Saul of Tarsus, breathing out hatred and murder against the church, encountered the risen Christ and became the chief evangelist for Christianity. The Apostle Paul. Two brothers of Jesus. I mean, if anyone's going to know whether or not he rose from the dead for real, it's going to be his brothers. They both became Christians and contributed to books of the Bible. We know that Christianity makes sense of the world as we actually experience and observe it. Right? We know we're broken. We know there's something wrong. We know that we want things we shouldn't want, and that there's things we should do that we don't want to do. We know that our desires and our wants and our motives get twisted up. And there's things in the world that we know that's not the way it's supposed to be. Just yesterday, I stood here. These beautiful flowers were donated. We had a funeral yesterday where a fabulous, wonderful woman, I'm sorry I never got to meet, but from the stories I heard and the things that have been said, was a wonderful blessing of a person who spent the final years of her life in a home being cared for because her mind was gone. That's not right, y'all. We know that's not the way life is meant to be. Everything in us screams, that's broken. The world has gone awry. That's what Christianity teaches. That the world's broken, but that God through Christ brings healing and will one day bring restoration to the world. I love what C.S. Lewis said. He said, desires are meant to be filled. For every desire that you have, there is something that will fill it. If you're hungry, there's food. If you're thirsty, there's water. You want companionship, there's other people. But if I find something in me that desires something that this world cannot satisfy, there's only one answer. That means there's got to be something else out there. And that something else is God. The question is, we know all this stuff to be true. What do we do with this knowledge? Do we suppress it? Do we continue to focus on ourselves like Judas or like the priests? Or do we, like Mary, give Jesus the best we have to offer? Do we give him our everything? Because whenever we recognize the truth of this matter, that we are broken, fallen, sinful people, and that Christ came to save sinners like us, there's only one reaction we should have, and that is to repent of our sins, that we confess Christ, you our Lord, and place our faith in him, follow after him that we might be saved. The truth is there. Are we going to accept it and follow it? Or are we going to be like Judas, who walked day after day after day with Jesus and still said, no, I'm not going to follow that? Or like the priest who had the evidence of Lazarus standing there, staring them in the face and said, let's get rid of it, we don't want to believe it. Or we're going to be like Mary and the disciples who said, yes, Lord, you are the Christ. I will follow after you.
Every time I feel the walls closing, you cover me and breathe life in me again. Lord, though I feel the darkness come, I will not fear, you've ransomed me with blood.